was able to give some comments on the hemp laws. And also I see on my iPad here we've got Erica McConnell, Director of Alcohol and Marijuana Control Office, Joan Wilson, Alaska Department of Law, and then I also see in the audience here we also have from the Department of Law Casey Schroeder. So if there are any questions, we've got Representative Guttenberg and then Gren.
Thank you. Well, Senator, I am supportive, but I do have an issue, and perhaps Mr. Keyes and Ms. McConnell could best answer it. And that is the conflict between hemp and pot and outdoor growing fields and the pollen. And I think it's one of those where there might not be we might be living in still in silos, but there has to be an understanding, from my impression, between the two of them. And I don't know if it's been addressed yet in the bill, but I'm wondering if Mr. Keyes, being the Director of Ag, has been approached by that, or perhaps the Senator.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Senator Hughes?
We did have discussion on that, and if it's okay with you, if Buddy Whitt could first address that, what we did, and then if you have further questions,
sure,
the division may want to chime in.
And Mr. Whitt, if you could put yourself on the record again.
Yes. Thank you, Chairs Foster and Seaton, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Buddy Whitt, staff to Senator Shelley Hughes. On page 3 of the bill, lines 4 through 7, as the bill sponsor articulated, we were approached with this concern. So this information, or this provision, was put into the bill, and this falls under the Division of Agriculture's responsibilities to adopt regulations related to industrial hemp. And it states that they must establish isolation distances for the production of industrial hemp. The purpose for putting this in was to address that concern specifically. The reason that we chose not to put a specific distance in statute was to give the Division of Agriculture the leniency to decide what that distance should be. It'd be better for them, through their knowledge and expertise on the subject matter, to establish that through regulation, rather than us put some distance in here which may not work or may be too far and precludes people who are interested in growing from growing. Beyond that, to the actual agronomics of the product itself and how crops can be too close and what effect that can have. Mr. Rob Carter, with the state agronomist with the Plant Materials Center, if he's online, he can give you additional information on how these plants reproduce and some of the things that he's been looking at as far as that goes.
If I can ask a question when he answers it at the same time, it might help.
Representative Guttenberg.
Thank you. It's my impression there's really a limited number of outside facilities, outside farmers, right? I don't think there's a broad range of growers who just grow outside. Most of them are in controlled greenhouses and completely indoors. And I was surprised when a friend of mine, somebody I knew, invited me to go out to his farm. He's a commercial gardener to begin with, vegetable gardener, and see what he had growing outside, and he has a strain. So it might not apply to greenhouses or inside commercial growers, and when we get the answer, I would appreciate if they would answer that question as well.
Mr. Carter, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am.
And did you hear the question okay?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay, if you could pick yourself
for the record, this is Rob Carter, through the chair, Representative. Isolation distances, I guess we should really, for the committee, get and for yourself, get a general fundamental of them. Isolation distances is a minimum separation required between two or more varieties of the same species. In this case, we're speaking of industrial hemp, cannabis sativa, industrial hemp, and cannabis sativa, recreational marijuana. And the purpose of these are, in the case of seed production for industrial hemp, is keeping that seed pure, and in the case of recreational marijuana, is keeping their female crops for being seed-free so they have a viable product to sell. We set these isolation distances for a multitude of other crops that meet the federal certified seed standards, from alfalfa to barley to oats to wheat. and they're set in accordance with science, with things that have been based on documented science around the globe. And so in this bill, with that language being brought up, as Mr. Whitt had mentioned, we will do our due diligence to make sure that we have, when regulating, we will make sure that we have explored every opportunity from Colorado to Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Canada, and then of course the EU that's been growing industrial hemp for a significant amount of time, to make sure that we set those isolation distances so that an industrial hemp crop doesn't impede on the production of a recreational crop. If you'd like some specifics on distances, I do have some information on those, but I think that's a good starting point.
If I may, a follow-up question.
Representative Guttenberg?
So I understand Colorado is considering 5 or 10 miles, and recognizing the feds have done probably no research on this. What are the parameters that other jurisdictions have set?
For the record, this is Rob Carter. Through the chair representative, Colorado, yes, has started looking at those ideals of those mileage between two similar species. We look at it from the purity standards of setting feed tolerance isolation distances. Colorado has set out their recommendation for their isolation distance required for cannabis production. It depends on the type. That's one thing that has to be that's very unique to this crop. There's diecious types, there's monoecious types, and then there's hybrids that are all female, and each one of those have a different isolation distance. And so the recommended isolation distance in Colorado for the highest quality, most pure, which is called the foundation or registered style of seed, is 16,150 feet in places in Canada, and these distances are set regionally based on wind patterns because cannabis sativa itself is highly wind pollinated. It is also held pollinated by insect as well, but wind is definitely the main dispersal method for distributing pollen. And in Canada, some of those those isolation distances are anywhere between it depends, but anywhere between 1 meter and 5,000 meters in Canada at this point. I think we're going to have to build regional isolation distances for Alaska. And I think there's going to have to be a lot of good communication with the registered and recognized commercial growers through the Marijuana Control Board for the division to identify where those outdoor recreational cannabis is being produced, so that we can make sure that we give everyone right to produce the crops that they need.
Who knew? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Gren?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I saw in the fiscal note 220